Me know if you can see. Okay.
Yes.
So can you see the video
Yes.
or the PowerPoint? Well, great. So hi, my name's Lauran Ziegler. I am the Assistant Director of Special Education here in Hanover. I've been in the special ed business for a long time, almost 37 and a half years. Um, and I've worked with the children of all different disabilities and many roles from teacher to administrator to where I am now. Um, I got involved in the VAT when I was still working in Chesterfield County because the person who in the central office that worked with the VAT retired, and I just took a new position. And so I had to learn everything I needed to know about the VAT. So I was not an adaptive curriculum teacher, but I've learned a lot along the way, and I've been involved in the VAT. It seems like forever. So we'll talk a little bit about that, and I'm going to give you some of the history, and we definitely should have some time for questions. So you know why you're here. So I'm going to start out talking about the standards of learning. Those are what guides the Virginia schools for the minimum expectations of what students are supposed to know in English, math, science, history, social studies, and other subjects. This is because the Board of Education has said these are the guidelines that we need to use for our instruction. And they are all the questions on those SOLs are created by classroom teachers, reviewed by classroom teachers, and they also have proficiency standards, like what is a passing grade, and that those are done by committees of teachers. And the same thing goes for when I started explaining about the VAT. It's very involved with the Virginia Department of Education. We're mandated by the federal government. But as I explained, I'll try to delve into some of those things. But we do have teachers that serve on committees that help outline questions, and that's always good because it's not just something coming from someplace else. We know we have teacher involvement. So when we say VAP, and you may hear some people say vape, but you can't change an old dog like me. It is the test that's available for students who have significant cognitive disabilities in grades 3 through 8 in high school. And the decision on whether a student takes the assessment that's an SOL test or a VAP, that's done in an IEP meeting by the IEP team. So you may ask, who's participating in the VAT? So when you get to that IEP team meeting, the team has to review, consider, talk about the variety of sources of information, look at the assessments that were done, observations, any achievement test data, any work samples, any evidence that there might be of a significant cognitive disability. We don't rely on like an IQ score as sufficient because there's a lot of factors that go in with students that might need a modified curriculum. So we really look at all the information that's available, their ability to the cognitive ability, also some adaptive behavior measures, which is sure like those life skill things. But the focal point of that discussion has to be on the impact of that cognitive disability. So I'm going to give you a little history so you know why we keep saying new VAP, and it may be new VAP to you guys if this is the first time you've talked or heard about it. Back in 2000, 2001, the state required, along with the SOL test, who had not been around but maybe a few years at that time, a portfolio to be created for students with cognitive disabilities. And that was our first VAP. So what the state created, and I'll show you in a few minutes, sort of the difference, is they created aligned standards of learnings, or you may have heard us speak of them as ASOLs or ASOLs. And that was the students produced that evidence. All that evidence was gathered and placed in a binder called a collection of evidence. Then at the district level, teachers would come in, and we would score those and send those scores off to the state. So up until last year, 2022, that is how we did it. Not that there haven't been changes in the VAP as we've moved along. The rigor of the ASOLs had gotten to be a better aligned with what the SOLs were. But what happened last year and what we kind of threw everyone for a loop is that it was no longer going to be a portfolio, no binder full of student work. It was replaced with multiple choice questions, and then those questions would have 3 answer choices that may be delivered in online or on a paper, so we could or both. And the current VAT format assesses students eligible in reading, writing, math, and science. So let me talk a little bit about those VSOLs, or why are they different than the SOLs? We call the VSOLs the Virginia Essentialized Standards of Learning. So they took those SOLs that all kids need to know for each grade level, and they reduced the depth and the complexity of what the student has to learn. And that's where we get the modified curriculum that we use, and that's in turn what we want to test our kids on. There's a very close connection between those and VSOLs and the SOLs. So they were developed, like I said, reduced in depth, breadth, and complexity. You'll hear that a lot. And we wanted to make the content for the test to be accessible for all students, appropriate for students with cognitive disabilities, and make it relevant. And also to make, all of the kids take a standardized test that's on the computer. Some kids still get paper pencil copies of those tests. But this also aligns our kids to being assessed in a similar format, which is really big. I can say last year was our first year, so we had a lot of apprehension because we didn't really know how to do it. But as we prepared last year for the VAP, and after the teachers completed the VAP in the spring, I think everybody felt like it was a good assessment and really got to what the students knew. So let me show you a little bit about what's different between an SOL and a VSOL. So here's the SOL for math, say grade 3. This may not be exactly the one that's there now because this is an old sample. The student will estimate and determine the sum or difference of 2 whole numbers. But what we would do to reduce the depth and complexity, a student in 3rd grade that's doing the VAP and is on a modified curriculum would be required to add and subtract whole numbers up to 20. So you can see that it's very related, but the depth and complexity is different. This is a grade 5 reading. So you can see they have summarized the plot events for the SOL, discuss the impact of the setting on the plot development, talk about the character development, explain the resolution of conflicts. When we reduce that depth and complexity for the VSOL, we're talking about identifying a character, a setting, or event in a story read to a student. And this is one from high school science. SOLs always have things like investigate and understand that biochemical processes are essential for life. Key ideas include water chemistry has an influence on life processes. Macromolecules have roles in maintaining life processes. Enzymes have a role in biochemical processes. Protein synthesis is the process of forming proteins, in which influences inheritance and evolution. And the processes of photosynthesis and respiration include capture, and then there was parts that wouldn't fit. But for the VSOL, for that science, and we would address that in a 4th grade, would be to recognize that plants need light, air, and water to grow and create energy through photosynthesis. So very much reduced in the depth and complexity, but really the same. We're really focusing on that same type of information for the student to know. So the VAP occurs the first time students are tested is in third grade, and they're tested in reading and in math from third through the eighth grade. And science tests are for fifth, eighth, and high school students only. I did not include a part that we do some other testing for the kids that is not part of the VAP that we still as a district require some assessments that are done within the classroom, like for writing. There's some history assessments that we require for the teachers to do. That is very much like the old VAP, but it's not, it's classroom work. So it's the only difference with that and anything they do during the day would be that they have to turn in to show me what they have done and we score it like we used to with evidence. And so we do still assess in a lot of areas, but these are the only areas that we have to assess for the VAP. One of the biggest differences in although when kids were working on portfolio, yes, it was done individually, but now the testing is truly individual and it gives the great flexibility, a possible use of presentation and response accommodations to meet whatever that student needs. In addition to providing individual accommodations, all items for the new VAP are based on principles of universal design. And a variety of supports are embedded, such as read aloud, pictures, information provided to the student by the teacher to help the student focus and remember important content. So the principles of universal design, we use them in education because that means that what we are teaching is accessible to everyone. But if you think about it, it comes from architecture where we have ramps so that people can easily get into buildings. We have traffic lights that speak or beep when it's time to walk. So the universal design is out there to make things so that everybody can access it. Also, they can do it on the computer, they can do a paper version, they can do both. And the other thing, because a lot of our kids who do participate in the VAP, and even sometimes with the SOLs, but especially with the VAP, is the stamina. How long will they be able to sit to try to do this assessment? So we can use multiple days for the assessment. And we'll probably do it. We haven't set out our plans much for this year on dates, but last year we did one subject area. I think we did science in February. We did math in March and reading in April. So that there is a wide area of time that people can work on it. And we had kids that, breezed through it and we went ahead and they finished by the end of February. So it's not days and days and days of testing, but you can break it down into really small pieces. Most of the items are read to students. Students have a great amount of flexibility at how they can show the answer. They can point, they can use whatever communication device they might already have, or whatever communication they can. We can still use eye gaze when we need to. But there's also online supports that come up with the program, such as text to speech and different color contrasts. And for our kids who might have some visual impairments, there's some magnification available. So all of these tests, there are things that we can use that don't have to be listed in the accommodations, but we often do. So when you have an IEP, you may hear us talk about manipulatives for math, or the ability to use a calculator, or verbal and visual prompts. And those are pretty standard accommodations for many kids with disabilities. But to do the VAP individual, there are some individual accommodations that might be discussed. One, we have to put in if we need it to be Braille, or if we have a student who's deaf or hard of hearing and we need some sort of interpreting, we have to make a special request for that. The other thing that you'll talk about in your IEP meetings is the read aloud, because there are a very small number of items that require the student to read, but we can put in the accommodation that those need to be read aloud to the student. And then, like I said, the flexibility for responding, we've always put in alternate representation of response options. Um, People use pictures sometimes that the students are familiar with because that's what on their communication device or what they've seen in a classroom. But like I said, we do a lot of different ways, any way that is comfortable for the student to respond. So what does it look like? It's really, the test is like 35 items long. And like I said, we can do it over multiple days. And the way the items work, it starts off with the easiest and it moves to the more challenging. So we don't expect that some of the students will complete all of the test items, even though we have those flexibilities in place. The examiner, who's usually the classroom teacher, determines that a style, if they determine that a student can't go any further in the test, maybe they're getting frustrated or that they know that they have demonstrated what their ability on what that subject area is, they can discontinue the testing. But we have students that will just keep on, and students who complete at least five items are considered to have participated. We will have, if the student, for some reason, we discontinue the test and we don't have 5 items, then that would impact their score. But I don't think we had any last year that didn't make it through 5 items. Yes. So you may hear, and I'm sure that Katie will probably share with you this term critical decision point. And this is one of those critical decision points that we talk about for parents and students and IEP teams. And that is that second or third grade IEP typically determines how the student will participate in the state's accountability system. So we call it critical because there are some long-term repercussions. And those have to do with diplomas that students can earn in high school. Now, I told you I've been doing this a long time, and the diploma statuses have changed over the years. So I will promise you that by the time your child is ready for graduation, that these will be the same diplomas that are available. Um, they tend to change, but there is the advanced studies diploma, which is for students that are typically going to go to a 4-year college. The standard diploma is for kids who might want to go to a 4-year college, but they may want to just go to community college or go straight to a career. And the applied studies diploma is only available to students identified as having a disability who meet the requirements of their IEPs, but they don't meet the requirements for the diplomas above. The applied studies diploma is not available for children with 504 plans, but we're not discussing those kids today. So the reason we call this a critical decision point is it's really hard to think about in third grade what kind of diploma is my child going to get. That's a tough decision, but what we do need to think about is what kind of instruction does my child need. And it's very critical that we know that your student or your child is on a modified curriculum. That means that they're not receiving the same instructional content as their peers, and they won't be prepared to take an SOL test or a standardized test. And without those credits from those kind of classes, they won't be able to earn either a standard or advanced diploma. But, what's the difference between a modification or accommodation? A modification really changes what the student is doing. If I go back to where the math, where they were to add and subtract numbers, but the requirement for that VSOL for our students was to add and subtract numbers up to 20. So it is essentially the same. There's that essential word, but it's different than what the standard is for most children in that grade level to do. So participation in the VAP is an important decision for you and your IEP team. Um, I think I've encouraged IEP teams to start talking about it early, because if your child's in a modified curriculum in kindergarten, it doesn't necessarily mean that they won't be able to participate in SOLs, but we need to know to talk about what the instruction looks like for our kids. Um, I missed some slides. Sorry about that. I was going to talk a little bit about the criteria. Um, Katie, are you putting any of those links in the?
I'm not sure that link is one I had. I did notice one of your early slides had a
Had the criteria.
criteria
Let me go back to that one.
on the, yeah.
I think I had it in small colors that did not stand out to me. There it is.
There.
Okay. I will share again and show you guys this. All right. Can you see this page for the Department of Education?
Yes.
Okay, great. So the Department of Education just updated their web page, and it sort of messed all of us up because some of our links that we have in some of our documents are not working right now. So I wanted to show you what it looks like, but we will make sure you have a link to this. When it comes time to talk about the VAP, I think it's a really good time for just to review we're talking about with the assessment page. You can see that we have training for teachers. We have advanced archive training, which was from last year. There are also some parent resources that are on here, which is great. I took some of our presentation from those resources. The other thing you will see down here are some samples of what the tests look like. But I want to show you the criteria first. There are really two forms that IEP teams should use when we're talking about determining if a student, I'm sorry, I have to save it. Oh, everything's slow today. There we go. So, the first document, and we do use this in teacher training as well, is to help the IEP team determine what do we mean by a significant cognitive disability. And like I said, we don't use IQ scores as the determination. Um, but I will tell you that the students that participate in the VAT should make up about 1% of the students that are tested on that grade level. So it's a really pretty small number. And we try to stay under that 1%. We can use IQ tests, but we really want to look at the whole student. Um, but the teams sort of look at this and look at some of the ranges for different kinds of intellectual disabilities. Um, and also talks about what their learning characteristics might be for a student that takes a VAP. They might have communication difficulties, um, uneven learning patterns across cognition, communication, motor impairments sometimes, difficulty learning new tasks, and that we use different and individual ways to assess what students know. It talks a little bit about what we're talking about for the adaptive behavior, those life skill things. So that's sort of what the IEP team starts with. But to determine if a student needs the VAP, this is why I have 800,000 things on my desktop. During that IEP meeting, typically after you get through the accommodations, what you'll see is it'll be time to do the participation criteria. And we go through a checklist, and it is required that any student that is taking the VAP, this checklist is done. And we talk through as a team to make sure that we are not basing their participation on any of the following factors: that they're absent, that they have a certain identification label, that there's not an English language learner, not that they are served or by a teacher who is in a certain classroom, or the instructional setting, the amount of time they receive special ed. We talk about the score, what we don't want someone to say, well, they'll never be able to pass an SOL test, they should take the VAP. No, that's not how you qualify for it. And we have a belief that even if we did all of the accommodations that we could possibly do, that student's not being instructed in those SOL standards, and they could not take the test. So then we go through some questions. Is there an IEP? Then the discussion about are there significant cognitive disabilities? And that links to the form I just showed you. Does the present level indicate the need for extensive direct instruction and or intervention in a curriculum that's based on the Virginia Essentialized Standards of Learning? And does it indicate that students require direct and intensive instruction to learn life functional skills? So that's a very important question. And does the student need explicit and intensive instruction or extensive supports in settings to acquire and maintain and generalize those academic and life skills? Then there's a question about the diploma. Then signatures go around. So it should be a discussion, and our IEP teams are charged with that critical decision point to talk about the ramifications of on the diploma for the VAP. It is a difficult decision sometimes for some parents, and it's a difficult decision sometimes for some IEP teams. We do have some students that may have taken SOLs in 3rd grade because we just weren't sure, and they were out in general ed and getting that those general ed standards. But then as the curriculum got harder, they realized they need more intensive supports. So that would be, doesn't mean that you're on, if you're on VAP, that you would be on VAP forever. But it does mean, or that if you're on SOL, you would be on SOL forever. That's always an IEP team decision and discussion. And as children grow and change, so we have to look at the child. That's why we have annual IEPs, to look at each child every year. So that's pretty much what I have, but I am happy to answer any questions.
I went ahead and added a few things to the chat. Oop. There's some links there in the chat that will take you to the DOE that page that Lauran was on there, and you can look at that criteria worksheet there. In addition to just a quick information about that applied studies diploma that Lauran was talking about. And I'm going to go ahead and link an evaluation form for today in the chat as well. But did anybody else have questions for Lauran about alternate assessment or anything she's covered today?
Hi, Lauran.
Hi.
Okay, my question is very specific.
Okay.
So guide me if